Alrighty, Layne, mate, how are we doing today?
A little hectic, but that's kind of how my day goes. So,
Yeah,
no worries.
no, that's cool, mate. Look, I've been wanting to get on here and pick your brain just about a few little topics that I know so many people are interested in. Not just about protein synthesis and all the things that you have, delved deep into in your career, but also a little bit about your training. I'm most fascinated about the training aspect of things, and especially when people like yourself that are doctors who actually walk the walk and do the things that we're recommending to people on a daily basis, lifting weights and staying fit and healthy. Mate, I think it's a big inspiration for a lot of people that do follow you. I wanted to just quickly touch on your most recent powerlifting meet, mate. Pretty impressive numbers. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 95% positive about it. I finished second, so that's, it was, I had a great meet, and this was the guy I beat at Nationals, Mike Carrazzo, and he just had perfect meet, like not much else you can do about
Yeah.
it. And, you know, I, it kind of, this gets into a little bit of like powerlifting strategy, but essentially, um, he had what's called a higher lot number, and essentially lot number is the order that you weigh in, and it's chosen randomly. So if you
Yeah.
have a low lot number, you weigh in earlier, which is an advantage because it's 2 hour weigh in, you have a chance to rehydrate. But when you have a higher lot number, when it comes down, I mean, really specifically only in this circumstance is when it really makes a big difference, because your final deadlift, your third deadlift is the only lift you can change. And once you've entered in a number, you can still change it. And so I put in, like, we both hit our seconds, and he was up by, I think, 2.5 kilos. And so I put in a number that I felt like I could hit that would push him. He put in the same number. Now, what can happen is if I missed, he can change it and then go to a lower number. Actually, he had already beaten me. But if I hit, which I did, he could just add half a kilo because they were both records. So mine was a record and his was a record. So usually you have to jump 2.5 kilos, but he was able to jump half a kilo. And since he had the luxury of seeing me go first, we're kind of guessing, what do I have in the tank versus what do we think is going to push him. And it just ended up that, he had that luxury. Now, he had more in the tank. I probably had some more in the tank. If it'd been the other way around, could have gone differently. It could have, but like, that's just the sport. There's not much you can do about it.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, I know when I did my first powerlifting meet, which I kind of did on a bit of a whim, which I freaking loved. Like, I had an absolute blast doing it. The same sort of scenario. I was in a category where a fella was about a kilo lighter than me, and they took that into account. And I beat him by 2.5 kilos, I think, on the total. But because he was like 1.3 or 1.4 kilos lighter than me, in the end, he got a better score than I did. I did it off a calculation of some description.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting second as well. And I was just like, fuck. But it was fun nonetheless. But, for me, I think for most people know you for, being, really smart around the protein synthesis and how we absorb protein. Quickly just touching on a bit of that, I just wanted to talk to you if you know any studies or anything that's important for people that may be choosing an omnivorous diet or a carnivore diet as opposed to, say, a plant-based diet or a vegan diet. Is there any consideration in terms of the rate of protein synthesis between the two, or is it mainly just looking at the spectrum of amino acids that fall within those areas or those types of foods that we're eating? Or are we actually assimilating better nutrients or better protein out of, say, chicken or fish or beef rather than, say, legumes, beans, all that type of stuff?
Yeah, so there's multiple layers to this, but essentially, first off, I'll cut to kind of the end, which is you can build as much muscle on a plant-based diet as you can on an omnivorous or carnivore diet. But I don't recommend a carnivore diet just because it's devoid of fiber, which, despite what they may say, is good for you. Never thought I'd be having to defend the virtues of fruits and vegetables. But it may take more overall protein on a plant-based diet for a couple of reasons. The first of which is the bioavailability. So in animal proteins, they tend to be more bioavailable because in plant proteins, quite a bit of the protein is bound up in the fibrous material of the plant. Now, cooking can make it more bioavailable because you break some of those bonds, but it still doesn't end up being like the same bioavailability. And then the amino acid profile of plant proteins is usually not as good as animal-based proteins. But there are some that are pretty good. Like, for example, what I typically tell people who are on a plant-based diet is it will be very helpful to supplement with some sort of plant protein, isolated plant protein, because an isolated plant protein is going to be much more digestible. And like in the case of soy, I know soy has a lot of stigma around it, but we have multiple meta-analyses now to show that it doesn't really impact testosterone, estrogen, nothing like that, at least at the dose of like 1 to 2 servings a day. And soy tends to have a pretty good amino acid profile. Potato protein isolate, actually pretty darn good if you can find it. It's hard to find, but it actually has a very similar leucine and essential amino acid profile to whey protein. And then obviously you can combine. So like if you're doing a corn protein actually is very high in leucine, like it's actually really high in leucine. If you combine that with like a soy protein, that would cover kind of your spectrum of amino acids. So you do have like multiple options, but the one thing about a plant-based diet is, especially if you're in a calorie deficit, it can be hard to get enough protein without getting too much carbohydrate and fat, depending on your deficit. And so those are just considerations you need to have. But in general, you can build as much muscle on a plant-based diet as you can on an animal-based or omnivore diet. It just takes a little bit more planning and probably a little bit more total protein.
Yeah, amazing. That's super cool. And you touched on leucine there, and that's just one amino acid that I would like to touch on a little bit more. Typically, like you mentioned, in most plant-based food or plant-based sources of protein, leucine is fairly low in comparison to its counterpart in the other direction. What does leucine do for the body, and why is it so important, especially for building muscle? What does it actually do for us?
So leucine essentially is the amino acid responsible for triggering muscle protein synthesis. So essentially, at least our best understanding is the body essentially evolved, instead of trying to sense every single amino acid for muscle protein synthesis, it essentially picked one, leucine, as kind of an indicator of protein quality. And if you look at, from a teleological or evolutionary perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense. And the reason why is because leucine typically reflects total essential amino acid content of a protein. It has passive transport rather than active transport. So basically it's concentration driven. So what you're getting is reflecting the concentrations that are in the bloodstream, what's entering the cell. And it's not really metabolized much by the gut or liver. So if you were like the body, and you were going to pick an amino acid, this is how evolution works, but I'm kind of paraphrasing. If you were going to pick an amino acid, you would want something that doesn't get metabolized a lot by the gut and liver, so that it reached the bloodstream in quantities that were reflective of what you're consuming in the diet. And you would want something that has passive transport across the cell, because then the amounts you see inside the cell are usually going to be reflected by what's in the bloodstream. So that's kind of our best understanding of things. Now, I don't want to say that leucine is responsible for 100% of muscle protein synthesis. Based on our best analysis, it's probably like 70% of the effective protein. So there are probably other things that do come into play, but leucine is a big chunk of it. And so we do know, like a great example is like your point about plant-based proteins being lower in leucine. So we actually did a study where we looked at whey protein versus wheat protein, both the same amount of protein and same calories, macros in the diets. What we saw was whey protein was significantly better at triggering muscle protein synthesis than wheat. Now, if you got wheat high enough overall in the diet, like once you got it up to like 30% of calories, at least in these diets, there wasn't a difference between whey and wheat just because total protein was high enough to where they were both hitting the threshold. But those lower, like 10, 20%, whey was better. Now, we went back and redid that where we took the same amount of whey, but we took wheat and added free leucine to it to match the leucine content of whey. And we found we did that, basically muscle protein synthesis was the same. So,
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems to be a pretty strong predictor of muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah, wow, that's so fascinating. And for someone who is an athlete building muscle, either powerlifter, strongman, even an endurance athlete, if we're sitting down for, let's say, anywhere from 3 to 5 meals a day, and we're looking to build muscle, repair muscle, all that type of stuff, how much total protein would we be looking to get if we're trying to maximize our strength gains for any given individual, and how much of that should be leucine?
Yeah, so there's layers to this. I'll answer the broad question first. So based on our latest meta-analyses, it looks like the effect is capped somewhere between 1.6 to 2.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. So it ends up, in America, the whole 1 gram per pound is kind of like the rule. That's probably pretty close. Now, there are some meta-regressions that have been done that suggest that the cap may be higher. A lot of it depends on how you run the statistics and whatnot. I've always had the opinion that I don't necessarily know if there's an anabolic cap to protein. What I think is that the benefits, the increase in benefits becomes so small after a certain point that it's basically undetectable in studies. So, for example, and I'm completely making up numbers here, right? Maybe going from, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, you get a 30 or 40% benefit from that.
Sure.
But going from 2 kilograms to 2.5 only gives you another 5 to 10%, and going from 2.5 to 3 only gives you less than 1%, right? So it's kind of flattening out. It never totally hits a hard cap. And I don't have any research data to back this up, but based on kind of what I know and have observed in research, I tend to think it's more like that. So what I'll say is hey, if you're worried about it, throw it up that upper end, 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight, something like that, or 3 grams per kilo of lean mass, and for all intents and purposes, you are capping it out. Yeah. And you're not, in my opinion, there's not really many downsides to a protein intake that high, other than if you're on lower calories, it's going to cut in how many carbohydrates and fats you can consume. It might make your diet a little bit more restrictive, and if you just don't like protein. But we never tell people, oh, you need that much protein to build muscle. No, I mean, you can build plenty of muscle even at 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. Will you build as much muscle as going up to 2? Probably not. But again, not everybody's looking to be the most muscular human they can possibly be.
Yeah. And in saying that, so if we're looking at, let's just say, give it a number, 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. Let's say we've got 150 kilo male whose ideal body weight is, say, 90 kilos. Would we then base his protein 2.0 off of his ideal body weight if he did want to decrease and get down to his optimal size? Is that what we're kind of doing? Or would you slowly scale it down?
So this tends to be where people get really pedantic about protein intake.
Yep.
And the body is not that fickle, is what I'll say.
Yep.
So, I just pick a number. Really, if we're going to be sticklers about it, it should be per kilo of lean mass. Because that is the protein requiring tissue. So what I tell people is, that cap is probably closer to, 2.8, 3 grams per kilogram of lean mass. But a lot of people don't really know their lean mass, and in studies, you can get a lot more data points just with straight body weight than you can with lean mass.
Wow.
So You know, what I'll say is, you know, if you're worried about it, 2.5 grams to 3 grams per kilo of lean mass. If you don't know what that is, 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo of body mass is perfectly fine as well.
Yeah, that's cool. And so for you, when you're going into, say, competition and you're about to get ready for, you know, a heavy squat, a heavy bench, a heavy deadlift, what are you mainly consuming the morning of getting ready? Are you looking at like electrolytes? Is that something that's at the top of your mind? Carbohydrates? What are you looking for to fuel yourself to perform optimally in that space?
Yeah, so it's very counterintuitive to what you would normally do on a weight loss diet, you know, for cutting weight. So the first thing I'll say is I do a 2 hour weigh-in because I'm with the IPF. So if you cut too much body weight with a 2 hour weigh-in, you are not going to perform well.
Yeah.
So usually, like, I am starting my water cut at like 209 I got to do kilos here, like 95, 96 kilos
Yeah.
to get down to 93. And usually what I'm doing is a couple days beforehand, I taper down my carb. 2 and 3 days out, I taper my carbohydrate intake down to about a half a gram per kilo, or to about 1 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight to flush out some water from glycogen.
Yep.
I also, starting like 2 to 3 days out, I'll cut my sodium in half. And then the day out from the show, I try to be under body weight, actually. So I'm usually trying to be around like right at 93 when I wake up. And then as I keep sodium low, I don't even cut water. As I keep sodium low, I will continue to lose body water. But what I'll do, and I'll also cut fiber at this time. I will not consume much fiber the day before. But I'll take carbohydrates up to like 3 to 4 grams per kilo, and mostly from sugary sources that are high caloric density. Because when you're that close to a weigh-in, it is more about the weight of the food you are consuming than it is the calories of the food in that short window. Long term, it's about the calories, and you want to consume lots of fiber and that sort of thing. But a day out, day up, you want very energy dense stuff, because if it has weight, you want it to have a lot of calories so that you refuel. So usually I'm actually consuming quite a bit of calories the day before, but I'll continue to drop body weight for that 24-hour period. Now, what I do is the day of the meet, I'll wake up, I'll weigh in. Usually I'll be like half to a full kilo under. I'll continue to eat. I'll drink a little bit of water when I wake up, and I'll kind of eat up to about half a kilo under and just do whatever it takes to maintain it there. And then about 2 hours before weigh-in, so 2 hours before weigh-ins, 4 hours before I lift, I take a big hit of electrolytes. Yep. So I'll put in whatever I can do to keep my body weight on point, like 300, 400, 500 milliliters of water with at least 2,000 milligrams of sodium, quite a bit of potassium and these other electrolytes. And I'll have that because a lot of people are trying to rehydrate after they weigh in. 2 hours is not a lot of time to rehydrate, but I'm starting 4 hours out. I'm getting those electrolytes in, and so those actually have a much better chance of hitting my system by the time I'm stepping on the platform. That sodium is not going to have, in 2 hours, it's not going to make me retain a bunch of water. That's not going to happen. But by the time I'm lifting, it's going to help with my performance. And so I really have had very few issues with cramping on meet day or getting lightheaded or anything like that. And then obviously after I weigh in, I usually drink 2 containers of Pedialyte pretty darn quickly. And then I've got water with electrolytes in it that I'm drinking throughout the day. And then what I'm eating for energy is usually gummy bears, Skittles, just high sugary foods that are very easily digestible, because you don't want a lot in your GI on meat day because of nerves and caffeine. You're probably going to end up in the bathroom a lot if you've got a lot in your GI. And then just bites of protein bars, whatever I can kind of get down. But a lot of these IPF meets go so quickly that you don't really have a lot of time to eat. So I'm just stuffing food in my mouth in between attempts, or in between, lifts. So that's kind of how I do it. and I've never had an issue making weight. Usually I can kind of do it, so I've got like a body weight advantage, so I can win on a tie.
Yeah, that's sick. Like, and that's exactly the same for me when I'm competing. As soon as you get off the competition floor, it's like, how much can I consume to make me feel good, not make me feel like I need to go to the bathroom before the next lift or before the next event. And it's all about, if we're doing say a 4-day competition at the CrossFit Games, we're eating on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for that Sunday competition to make sure that we have as much fuel in the tank as we possibly can. Because you can tell when you walk into the room, either some people have checked out and they haven't been eating well, and you can tell it, you can see it in their face that they're just gone, or you can see the people that walk in with a big bright smile and ready to rock and roll, a little bit less sore, tons of energy and ready to rock and roll. Which brings me to the next question. Have you ever tried CrossFit?
I haven't.
You haven't?
No, I'm not sure I'd be much good at it.
You never know. That's
I
okay.
just love lifting heavy stuff.
Yeah. Have you ever watched the games?
Yeah, I have watched the games a little bit. It's funny because a lot of powerlifters like to make fun of CrossFit and whatnot.
Yeah, totally.
And, but it's the sport of lifting weights combined with cardiovascular exercise.
Yeah.
And some people love it. Not me, but it's entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
And certainly, like, anybody who can do that is in fantastic shape. So
Yeah.
I think it's cool to watch. I just don't know if I can do it.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Like, I think it's all good, healthy banter. We don't mind too much. It's all good. Yeah, which brings me to
I'm a fat, slow powerlifter, so.
Hey, that's okay. That's cool. Look, I've jumped into a powerlifting meet, done some strongman comps, and then I've obviously done a bit of CrossFit, but also gone to the other end of the spectrum and tried some Ironman too. And for me, it's more so fascinating. I don't want to ever be defined at the end of the day. Like, when my days are done, I would not like to be defined as just a good CrossFitter. For me, it's all about, it's about a little bit more than that to me, but I like experience, and I like to be able to test myself, test my body, test my limits, see what I'm capable of, and then also put myself in situations that allow me to experience just life from a different perspective, regardless of whether it's, my sport of passion. More so, my passion is to experience more stuff. And that's what fires me up, and everybody's very different in that respect. But yeah, look, I can, once I jumped on the competition floor doing a powerlifting meet, I was so eager to do it again. And I think I will fire up and try and get strong and do it again for sure. And probably the next year or two, I'd like to get back on the platform. But I also would love to go and do some more strongman too, because that was, that's a bit of a combination of, raw strength and a bit of, dynamic capacity at the same time. You're moving heavy loads from A to B and things like that, which I do love and enjoy. Which brings me to my last question, because I know you're super busy. If you could give one takeaway for the listeners that were going to apply into their daily lives to just maybe increase some vitality or increase some energy that you mainly see most people making mistakes with, and this could be attack onto some of the things that you offer in your business, whether it's either nutrition or lifestyle coaching, whatever it may be. What are some main things that you think someone could introduce into their life to help them, whether it's sleep, a nutrition tip, or a bit of training advice?
I mean, it's going to be the boring stuff, that nobody wants to hear, which is, learn to train really hard. I think that is a very undervalued skill. There's a lot of people who want to biohack and tips, tricks, try this trick, try that trick. And I just watch them and I'm like, but you don't even train hard. Like, you don't even go. And I'm not saying that nasty. I'm just saying, like, being able to push yourself is a skill. I didn't walk in the gym able to do that. That was a skill I had to learn over time, and then at a certain point I was so good at it, I had to learn how to back off of it. You know what I mean? But the majority of people, and then I hear people worry about overtraining. I'm like, listen, unless you have competed at a very, very high level, you may be under-recovered because of your recovery, but the likelihood that it is because you are pushing yourself too hard is low. What is much more likely is you eat like trash and don't sleep. That's what's much more likely. I've seen very, very few people who are non-competitors. I've probably seen none, to be honest, who push themselves to the point where they're overreached if they're sleeping enough, and eating properly.
Yeah.
So it's really the boring stuff that we say. Learn how to push yourself hard in the gym And you don't need some special, I get this all the time too. Well, I want to do a more advanced routine. For those of you out there, I follow something that most of you would consider very boring. You would consider it very boring and repetitive. And you know what? People who are good at this stuff, it's usually they do boring and repetitive shit over and over and over and over and over again. And they just get really good at it. You know,
you hit the nail on the head.
If you need to stimulate yourself all the time by doing something advanced, that's fine, but you're basically doing it because you just have, I don't know, like
time
dopamine hit all the time. Like,
yeah,
you gotta learn how to that's fine to do here and there, but if you're relying on that for motivation to get you in the gym, that's not gonna last. So there's that, and then sleep. Sleep's so undervalued. I mean, it really is. Like, if you want, I mean, it's just the thing that you can do it, and immediately everything gets better. Immediately, like within a week, things start to get better. You're not as hungry. Your performance is better. You recover better. Like, it's just, but people don't want to do it because they want to stare at a screen.
Yeah. Mate, and you've hit the nail on the head for me. And this is typically when someone walks into the gym and says, hey, I want to go to CrossFit Games, or I want to go do my first Ironman. They're just like, what kind of program can you give me? And I'm just like, well, tell me about your sleep first. Tell me about how you eat. Tell me about, the people you hang around with on a daily basis. They're going to support you doing that stuff. And it's all the stuff that no one wants to do. That it's like the best program, the latest and greatest supplement that they've heard on YouTube somewhere. And it's like, if you do the 99% of things before you focus on the 1% things, and you do them really well, that virtuosity concept, you'll probably be one of the elite in the world, because that's what they do. They just do the repetitive, boring stuff on a daily basis, and they grind out the boring tasks so regularly.
You ever watch The Karate Kid?
Yeah, you've hit it.
That's a perfect example, right? He has him doing stuff, and the kid's like, this is stupid. I'm not even training, where he's watching all these other people doing this really advanced stuff. And this, by sheer mass effect, he gets good at it, because he's consistent, And it's like, I'll tell people, prove to me you can do the basics, and then we'll talk about advanced stuff.
Yeah, no, you've hit it. You nailed it. Layne, mate, thank you so much for jumping on today, mate. I really appreciate it, and I can appreciate that you're super busy, and, I think you're a really genuinely cool dude, and, hopefully I get to chat with you more over the coming years, and, mate, all the best with your next competitions, and hopefully see you soon.
All right, James. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too, mate. Thanks a lot.